In the stifling confines of a Roman slave market, under the volatile reign of Emperor Nero, a small, thin boy with a lame left leg tries to make himself invisible. The air is thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and the sour odor of collective despair. He is property, a talking tool, an anonymous slave. His name is Epictetus. He was born in Hierapolis, Phrygia, a prosperous Greco-Roman city in modern-day Turkey, famous for its brilliant white travertine hot springs that cascade down the hillside like a giant staircase. But the beauty of his homeland is now just a faint memory, a lost world. He was torn from his family, ripped from his native soil by the brutal machinery of the slave trade, a lucrative business that fed the insatiable appetite for labor in the world's most powerful empire. After a long and humiliating journey, he was sold and brought to the very heart of power and decadence, Rome. His new master was Epictetus, a complex and contradictory figure. Once a slave himself, he had been freed, and through cunning and cruelty, had risen to become the wealthy and powerful administrative secretary to Emperor Nero himself. Life for Epictetus under Epictetus's roof was a relentless series of submissions, of arbitrary commands and sudden beatings. His body was not his own. It was his master's property. His time was not his own. It was dictated by another's whim. Even his life hung by a thread, subject to the caprice of a powerful man's temper. Every dawn, he awoke to a naked truth. Everything around him, from the straw pallet he slept on, to the crust of bread he ate, to the very breath in his lungs, could be taken away at any moment. He had no control over his body, his possessions, or his reputation. He was the embodiment of powerlessness. It was a grim reality, an environment designed to crush the human spirit, to grind it down into mindless obedience. And yet, in that deep pit of helplessness where it seemed no ray of hope could possibly penetrate, a persistent question began to smolder in Epictetus's young mind. It was not a question of rebellion but of discovery. If we cannot control what happens to us, if the external world is an unpredictable storm, then where is the shelter? What is the one kingdom that no tyrant, no master, no twist of fate can ever conquer? This was not an abstract philosophical query debated in the comfort of a library. This was a survival mechanism. It was the only candle lit in the profound darkness of his life, an attempt to find a single, unshakable point in a world of constant flux. The answer he would eventually find, through years of observation, endurance, and reflection, would not only liberate him from his mental prison, but would also become the foundation of one of the most practical and powerful philosophies ever conceived. The journey of Epictetus, from a crippled slave to a revered philosopher, is a vivid and powerful testament to the extraordinary strength of the human will. His philosophy was not born in genteel debate, but forged in the crucible of suffering, the only place where one can discover the true nature of freedom. It is a philosophy written in scars, tempered by the harshest of trials, and for that very reason, it has the power to echo through millennia, touching the hearts of all who seek tranquility in a chaotic world. The life of a slave in a wealthy Roman household was not just one of manual labor. It was an existence of constant vigilance. Epictetus, living so close to the epicenter of power, inhabited a world of both luxury and imminent danger. As a confidant of Nero, he witnessed the conspiracies, the purges, and the volatility of a tyrant. This likely shaped his character, cruel to those below him, sycophantic to those above. He understood the absolute power a master held over a slave, and he did not hesitate to use it to vent his own pressures. There is an anecdote, perhaps apocryphal but nonetheless famous, that perfectly captures the spirit Epictetus began to cultivate in his darkest years. One day, in a fit of baseless rage, Epictetus began to twist Epictetus's already disabled leg in a torture device. Instead of screaming, begging, or crying, Epictetus calmly looked his master in the eye and said quietly, "Be careful, you will break it." Epictetus, perhaps further enraged by this silent defiance, twisted harder. A dry cracking sound echoed in the room. The leg was broken. Epictetus, without a flicker of change in his voice or expression, simply added, "I told you so." This story, whether true or not, encapsulates a profound truth that Epictetus was beginning to grasp. There is a fundamental difference between physical pain and mental suffering. Pain is a physical sensation, a neurological signal. But suffering, panic, hatred, self-pity, despair is a product of the mind. It is a story we tell ourselves about the pain. His body could be tortured, broken, but his mind, his inner citadel, remained an inviolable sanctuary. He realized that men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. Epaphroditus's rage belonged to Epaphroditus, not to him. The broken leg was a physical event that happened to his body, but the panic, the hatred, the despair, those, Epictetus realized, were generated by his own judgment. And if he could create them, he could also choose not to create them. This was the first seed of what he would later call the dichotomy of control, the foundational principle, the cornerstone of his entire Stoic philosophy. Fortunately, within this bleak existence, a sliver of luck appeared. Epaphroditus, perhaps recognizing the unusual intelligence and startling resilience of his young slave, allowed Epictetus to attend the lectures of the most famous Stoic philosopher of the day, Musonius Rufus. This was the turning point of his life. Musonius Rufus was no armchair philosopher. He believed philosophy had to be lived, not just spoken. He had been exiled twice for his integrity and outspokenness, a testament to the fact that he didn't just preach resilience, he practiced it. For Epictetus, Rufus's classroom was not an escape from his harsh reality, but a laboratory in which to dissect and understand that very reality. Under Rufus's guidance, the intuitions Epictetus had gleaned from his own suffering were systemized into a coherent and consistent philosophy of life. He learned that the universe is governed by a rational order, the logos, and that the goal of a human being is to live in harmony with that order. And to live in harmony, the first and most crucial step is to distinguish between the two distinct domains of life, those things that are within our control and those that are not. The things outside our control include our body. It can get sick, grow old, be injured. Our property, it can be stolen or destroyed. Our reputation, it depends on the opinions of others. Our social status and the actions of other people. To try and build our happiness on these fragile, ever-shifting foundations is to set ourselves up for inevitable disappointment and misery. Epictetus, more than anyone, understood this. He lived in a world where he owned nothing, not even his own flesh and blood. So what is within our control? Epictetus's answer is simple but profoundly deep. Our judgments, our desires, our aversions, and our intentions. In other words, our inner world, our faculty of choice and volition, prohairesis. We cannot control the rain, but we can control our judgment about the rain. What a terrible day, versus the plants will get watered. We cannot control being stuck in traffic, but we can control how we react, with fuming anger and a blaring horn, or with acceptance and a good podcast. We cannot control how other people treat us, but we can control whether we allow their actions to disturb our inner peace. This is the source of true freedom. True freedom lies in focusing on what we can influence, as attributing importance to external factors leads to disturbance and dissatisfaction. A man can be chained in a dungeon, but if his mind remains free to choose how he judges his circumstances, he is freer than the emperor on his throne, who is a slave to his own desires and fears. After the death of Nero in 68 AD and a subsequent period of civil war, Epictetus was manumitted. He was freed. He was no longer anyone's property. He could do whatever he wanted, but instead of pursuing wealth or power like his former master, he chose a radically different path, one that most Romans would have found bizarre. He chose to live a life of extreme simplicity, almost asceticism. He lived in a small hut with no door, furnished only with a straw bed, a pot, and an earthen lamp. He sought no material comforts because he understood they were outside his control, and therefore could not be a source of reliable happiness. He had watched the most powerful men in Rome tremble at a rumor, the wealthiest lose sleep over the fear of losing their fortunes. He realized that they, the nominally free, were in fact slaves to the very things they owned. Epictetus was different. By desiring nothing that was not truly his own, a clear mind and a virtuous character, he achieved a freedom that no one could take away. No man is free who is not master of himself. He began to teach philosophy in Rome, and his reputation quickly grew. Students from all over the empire, from young aristocrats to soldiers and merchants, came to hear the teachings of the former slave. He didn't teach with abstract lectures or complex theories. He taught through dialogue, using the Socratic method to challenge his students' long-held beliefs, forcing them to confront the contradictions in their own thinking. He was like a seasoned drill sergeant, training new recruits for the battle of life. He likened the philosophical life to military service, where students were soldiers at different ranks. He demanded that his students first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Philosophy was not for talking, but for living. It was a daily practice, ascesis, a relentless campaign to achieve self-mastery. One of the most important lessons he taught was how to deal with loss and the impermanence of all things. In a world where death, sickness, and separation are unavoidable, how can we possibly find peace? Epictetus's advice, born from the raw experience of a slave torn from his homeland and family, is both stark and liberating. He advises us to remember that everything we love is by its nature temporary. Never say of anything, "I have lost it, but I have restored it." Has your child died? It is restored. Has your wife died? She is restored. This may sound cold and unfeeling, but its deeper meaning is not about suppressing emotion. It is about acknowledging a fundamental truth of the universe. We don't truly own anything or anyone. We are merely temporary custodians. The universe has loaned us our loved ones, our possessions, and even our own bodies. One day it will ask for them back. By practicing this remembrance daily, with regard to whatever objects either delight the mind or contribute to use or are tenderly beloved, remind yourself of what nature they are. We can love more fully and deeply in the present without being shattered by loss in the future. We learn to appreciate the beauty of a crystal glass while simultaneously being aware that it can break at any moment. When it does break, we will not be shocked or devastated, because we understood its fragile nature from the very beginning. However, Epictetus's life of freedom and teaching in Rome was not to last forever. In 93 AD, the paranoid and tyrannical Emperor Domitian, who felt threatened by anyone who commanded influence or displayed independent thought, banished all philosophers from Rome and Italy. He feared those who taught about independent thinking, self-mastery, and the idea that a person's worth was not found in the wealth or status the emperor could bestow. He saw them as a threat to his absolute power. Once again, Epictetus faced loss. His home, his students, the life he had built in Rome, all were stripped away by an imperial decree. But for a man who had spent his life training his mind to distinguish what was his from what was not, this event was not a catastrophe. It was simply a change in external circumstances, something outside of his control. Instead of lamenting or resisting in vain, he simply complied and left. He relocated to Nicopolis, an important city in northwestern Greece, and established a new school. It was here, in exile, that he reached the height of his teaching career. His school became famous throughout the Greco-Roman world, attracting the most serious of students. One of those students was Arrian of Nicomedia, a historian and statesman who held his teacher in the highest esteem. Arrian meticulously recorded Epictetus's lively, extemporaneous lectures and dialogues, not in dry academic language, but in the very vernacular, powerful, direct, and sometimes coarse that he used. Thanks to Arrian's devotion, the wisdom of Epictetus was not lost to time. Those notes were later compiled into two immortal works, the Discourses and the Enchiridion, or Handbook. The Enchiridion, as its name suggests, is a short, concise manual on how to live a stoic life, designed to be carried with you like a soldier carries his weapon into the daily battle of life. Imagine a Roman legionary on guard duty at Hadrian's Wall, the cold northern frontier of the empire. He faces harsh weather, the constant threat of enemy raids, and profound loneliness. In his tunic, he carries a copy of the Enchiridion. When fear creeps in, he reads, "Demand not that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." When he feels anger at an injustice from a superior officer, he reads, "If anyone speaks ill of you, don't bother to defend yourself. Instead, respond, He must not know of my other faults. Otherwise, he would not have mentioned only these. When he feels homesick and worries for his family, he rereads the reminder of the dichotomy of control, focusing on the duty before him, the one thing he can perform with excellence. This is the legacy of Epictetus. He transformed philosophy from a lofty, elite discipline into a practical toolkit for everyone. He proved that no matter how dire the external circumstances, every individual has the power to create their own inner peace and dignity. His life is the resounding answer to the question the young slave boy asked himself in the darkness of the cellar so long ago. The one thing we truly own, the one thing that can never be taken from us, is our power of choice. The choice of how we interpret the world, the choice of how we respond to events, and the choice of who we want to be. In our modern world, we do not face the brutality of Roman slavery, but we face more subtle and pervasive forms of bondage. We are slaves to the endless notifications on our phones, to the pressure to project a perfect life on social media, to the expectations of our families and society, to the chronic anxiety about our finances, to the insecurity of an uncertain future. We are constantly bombarded with the message that happiness lies outside of us, in the next purchase, the next promotion, the next exotic vacation, the next like on a post. And just like the wealthy Romans Epictetus observed, the more we have, the more we fear losing. The philosophy of Epictetus rings out like a powerful alarm bell. It invites us to undertake an inner revolution, a radical shift in perspective. Start with a simple exercise, one you can do right now. Take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left side, write "within my control." On the right side, write "outside my control." Now, be honest with yourself and list all the things that are currently causing you anxiety, stress, or unhappiness. Your health, the state of the economy, your boss's opinion of you, your children's behavior, a mistake you made in the past, the future of your relationship. Place each item in its proper column. You will quickly discover something astonishing. The vast majority of what occupies your energy and mind is in the right-hand column. We spend most of our lives trying to control the uncontrollable, like someone shouting at the ocean tide to stop rising. The result? Exhaustion, frustration, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of powerlessness. Epictetus would tell us, shift your attention. Make a strategic withdrawal from the battles you cannot win. Focus all your energy, your intelligence, and your will on the left-hand column, on your small but powerful kingdom. You cannot control whether you get laid off, but you can control updating your resume, expanding your network, and learning a new skill every day. You cannot control the stock market, but you can control your long-term investment strategy and your spending habits. You cannot control whether someone loves you, but you can control whether you are a loving, kind, honest, and trustworthy person. This is the shift from being a passive victim of circumstances to being a proactive agent of your own life. It is the realization that in every situation, no matter how bad, we always have one final freedom, the freedom to choose our attitude and our response. Consider a common workplace scenario. You poured your heart into a project, but in a team meeting, a colleague takes credit for your work. The natural reaction is anger, resentment, and a feeling of injustice. This is the response of someone who believes their happiness depends on external validation, something outside their control. A practitioner of Epictetus's philosophy would take a stoic pause. They would ask themselves, what in this situation is actually within my control? The colleague's action? No. The boss's reaction? No. The credit I receive? No. The only thing in their control is their own response. They could choose to wallow in negativity, poisoning their work performance and relationships, or they could choose another path. They could calmly and privately present their contributions to their boss later. They could take it as a lesson in the importance of communicating their role more clearly in future projects. Most importantly, they could find their satisfaction not in the praise of others, but in the knowledge that they did their work with integrity and excellence. Their true worth comes not from the outside, but from their own actions and character. Do not take pride in external achievements or attributes. Genuine worth lies in how we utilize our capabilities and align with nature. Epictetus's life ended quietly in Nicopolis. He lived to an old age, revered and beloved by his students. He left behind no property, for he had never valued it. The only legacy he left was his words, captured by a devoted student. He had lived exactly as he had taught, a simple, free life focused on virtue and self-mastery, unmoved by the turbulence of the external world. He proved conclusively that a person born into the lowest of circumstances, physically crippled and stripped of all basic freedoms, could still achieve greatness and an unshakable inner peace. His journey is more than just an inspiring historical tale. It is a map, a detailed guide for anyone seeking a way out of the prisons of their own making. It reminds us that the real chains are not made of iron, but of our own faulty judgments, our insatiable desires, and our baseless fears. And the key to breaking those chains is not found in changing the world outside. It is found right here, right now, in our ability to choose to focus on what matters, to choose to act on our values, and to choose to accept reality as it is, with courage and grace. From the darkness of a slave's existence, Epictetus lit a torch that has illuminated humanity. It is the torch of reason, of discipline, and of an indomitable dignity. And that flame continues to burn, offering warmth and guidance to those who, in the midst of life's storms, dare to bravely declare, "I can be harmed, but I will not be harmed. I can be chained, but my mind remains free." That is the immortal legacy of a lame former slave who taught the entire world the true meaning of mastering your own life.